Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. We've recently just returned from Scotland after touring the North Coast 500, aka the NC500. We had an absolutely amazing time and were blown away with what the Highlands had to offer. Marisa spent weeks planning out the trip before we set off, and we decided to try and condense that planning down with as much useful information as we can into just a short video. We also added our 5 top tips. 99% of this information will apply whether you're doing the NC500 in a motorhome, a car, motorbike, or even a push bike. So without any more time wasting, let's get started. Oh, and the West Coast and the East Coast are quite different, so stick around to the end of the video to see what the whole route has to offer. To kick off our first tip, we'll start with which route to take. For those who don't know, the NC500 is a 500-mile loop around the top of Scotland, starting and ending in Inverness. You can choose to either travel clockwise, taking the West Coast up and then across and down the East Coast, or vice versa, East Coast up first and then down into the West Coast. Our advice would always be travel the East Coast first. The driving's a lot easier, so you get a chance to get used to the roads, and the scenery just gradually gets better and better. The sights on the West Coast are some of the best we've seen in the world, so we would advise save the best till last. So let's get onto the trail. After a long drive up to Scotland, we arrived at our first location, Loch Ness. We stayed at a campsite called Loch Ness Shores, which was located, as the name suggests, at the side of the Loch Ness Shores. The campsite was outstanding. The location was perfect. They had a shop and a restaurant on site, and just a short 5-minute walk was a pub. Cooking on gas, missus?
We are, literally.
What are you making for breakfast?
I'm going to make some bacon in our little, in the motorhome. I've been actually really excited to do this.
We decided we want to hire a motorhome to travel the NC500. It seemed to us to be the best way to see as much as we possibly could with the maximum amount of comfort. We hired our motorhome for 7 nights from Swift Go, costing us £1,045 for the week. The company was brilliant and we had no issues with them whatsoever, and the van was great. After a comfortable night's sleep in the motorhome, we made our way out to our first stop on our busy itinerary. Located right next to the campsite is a waterfall called Falls of Foyers. It's about a 45-minute to an hour walk. It can get quite difficult at some points as it's mostly uphill, but it's well worth the walk. The views are great. After we finished our walk, we packed up a camper van and headed to our next destination, Urquhart Castle. Urquhart Castle is located on the opposite side of Loch Ness, and it's around a 50-minute drive from our first campsite, Loch Ness Shores. To enter the ruins, it cost us £9.60 per person, and as you enter the main ruin, there's tons of information boards in each room explaining what role that room had to play. On site, there's a shop, toilet facilities, and also a cafe. After we spent about 1 hour touring Urquhart Castle, we left and headed for our final destination of the day, Inverness. We parked the motorhome in a Morrison's car park, which was located in the centre of Inverness. In all honesty, it really wasn't that much to do in Inverness. Maybe because it was a Sunday, or maybe COVID had played a big part in that. We had a quick walk round, saw the cathedral, and then headed back to the supermarket to fill up on food and a couple of beers before heading to our campsite for the evening. So not a huge amount of travelling on our first day. We started off at Loch Ness Shores, onto Urquhart Castle, stopped off quickly in Inverness, and then drove to our campsite located in Dingwall. So tip number 2, make a plan. There's so much to see on the NC500 and so many different stops. If you're going up there without any form of plan, you're more than likely to miss so many great attractions. Either use what you can from this itinerary or make your own, but at least have some form of idea what you want to do when you get up there. After a rainy start to our second morning, we headed to our first stop, Black Isle Brewing Co. At the site, there's a working brewery which you can tour, and there's also a shop where you can buy beers brewed on site. Stopping off here gives you a great opportunity to buy some locally sourced products and give back to the Highlands. After leaving the Black Isle Brewery, we headed to Chanonry Point. It was about a 20-minute drive from the brewery. Chanonry Point is one of the best spots in the UK to try and spot bottlenose dolphin. The weather wasn't really on our side that morning. The sea was choppy and the clouds were rolling in. We didn't manage to spot any dolphins, but we still stopped off to have a quick look around. After a quick walk around Chanonry Point, we got back into the motorhome and headed out to Fairy Glen Falls. It's only a short 7 or 8 minute drive from here, but this is one of the highlights to the east coast for both us two. Because of all the rain, the waterfalls were rarely active. It's a fairly simple walk for about half an hour to 40 minutes, and there's 2 different waterfalls to see. The second one is just a small climb up a couple of steps. Well worth the visit though, we thoroughly enjoyed stopping off here. If you're planning on visiting Fairy Falls, make sure you take some walking boots or at least some wellies. We walked by a couple of people who attempted it in trainers after the rain, and that really wasn't a great idea. After we finished off at Fairy Waterfalls, we then headed the hour and 15-minute drive up the east coast to our next destination, Dunrobin Castle. Because of the rain, we left camp that morning a little bit late and we were behind schedule. When we finally arrived at Dunrobin Castle, it was around 4 o'clock. We were told that the last entrance to the castle was 4:30, and we decided not to bother, as half an hour didn't seem enough time to walk around the castle and the grounds. So we just had a walk around the outside of the castle, and we saw exactly what we wanted to see anyway, so we were quite pleased. After spending about 30 minutes walking around the castle from the outside, we then jumped back into the motorhome and drove for the final stretch of the east coast up to John O'Groats campsite. It's around 1 hour 30 from Dunrobin's to John O'Groats campsite. The main attraction of the John O'Groats caravan campsite is the location. It sets you up perfect for the next day on the NC500. So to recap the day, we started off at Dingwall, headed to the Brewery, then Chanonry Point, Fairy Waterfall, then we drove an hour and 15 minutes to Dunrobin Castle, and then the final 1 hour and 50 up the east coast to John O'Groats campsite. So for our third tip, book in advance. We started planning our trip around 6 weeks out before we set off to the NC500, and even then we struggled to get in some of the campsites. Each year the route is getting more and more popular. So for our first stop on day 3, we landed at the John O'Groats sign. We didn't realise when we arrived the night before, but this was literally a 1-minute walk away from the campsite. We turned up at 8:30 and there was no one there queuing, so we managed to grab a couple of pictures and had the sign all to ourselves. After our pictures, we headed to our first stop of the day, Duncansby Head. So here, there's a lighthouse and also walking distance are 2 sea stacks. Sea stacks are about an hour round trip walk from the car park. You can also see tons of seagulls, and also there's a possibility to spot some puffins. After leaving the sea stacks, we then headed a 30-minute drive to Dunnet Head. Dunnet Head is famous for being the most northerly point on the mainland Britain. There's another lighthouse, which is pretty great to see, and also on a clear day you can see right out to the Orkney Islands. After having a walk around Dunnet Head and having a couple more pictures, we set off on our way, and that's when we met these two, having a good scratch. Highland cows scattered all the way around the NC500, but these two were right on the side of the road and too good to pass the opportunity to have a picture. After leaving these two, we headed to the town of Thurso. We just used this as a quick pit stop to fill up on fuel and food that we needed at a local supermarket. This leading us nicely on to tip number 4. Fuel. Make sure you keep an eye on your fuel level as you're travelling the NC500. We'd recommend not dropping below a quarter of a tank. Sometimes you can go as long as 50 miles along the route without passing another petrol station, so bear that in mind. After leaving Thurso, this is when you really see the North Coast 500 come to life. The scenery just gradually gets better and better, so we had a slow drive to our campsite and stopped off at a beautiful beach along the way. We stopped off at Farr Beach. It's one of many beaches along the NC500 route. This one was especially quiet and we seemed to have the whole beach to ourselves the entire time we were there. After leaving Farr Beach, we made our way along the north coast and headed to our campsite for the evening, Kylesku campsite. The campsite was located in a great place. The facilities were also really up to date. So to recap on day 3, we started off at John O'Groats sign, had a short drive to Duncansby Head, then we headed to the next lighthouse at Dunnet Head, then we drove down into Thurso for a pit stop to fill up on fuel and food, and we took a steady drive to Farr Beach along the north coast, and then finally into our campsite, Kylesku. Starting off day 4, we got up bright and breezy, first to leave camp because we had a 40-minute drive to our first destination of the day, Smoo Caves. There's parking right outside the cave, and although we set off from camp really early, this was one of the more popular destinations we came across. So as you arrive at the car park, you take a walk down some steps, over a bridge, and then into the cave. Inside the cave is also an active waterfall. It is a popular destination, but we managed to get parked easy enough, and we saw exactly what we wanted to see and out the way. We probably spent around 20 to 25 minutes just having a quick walk around the cave and enjoying what we could see. After leaving Smoo Caves, we decided to get out of the rain and head to a local chocolatier shop. All the reviews that we've read said the hot chocolate is the best they've ever tasted. So we followed their advice, ordered a hot chocolate, a coffee, and took a pack of chocolate with us.
It is delicious. Very, very nice. Really chocolatey and creamy.
After the hot chocolate got a thumbs up from both of us, we then headed to the next destination on Marissa's itinerary, Sango Bay Beach. So unbelievably, Sango Bay Beach on TripAdvisor is voted one of the best beaches in the world. We just happened to catch it on a bit of a rainy day. There's also a really popular campsite here called Sango Sands Oasis. As we said earlier, this is one of the campsites that we tried to book in advance, but there was no space available even 6 weeks out. We retreated back to the motorhome to take shelter from the rain and then set off to our next stop. Sango Bay was the last of the stops on the very north coast, and now we had to take a 1-hour journey down the west coast of the NC500. Next up was the famous Kylesku Bridge. The bridge is known best for its sweeping structure, measuring 275 metres long, and it stands almost 30 metres high above the water below. Right at the side of the bridge is a car park to stop off and enjoy the amazing views of both the bridge and the landscape. As we travelled down the west coast, the scenery just seemed to be getting better and better, and our luck with the weather slowly started to change. We headed to a popular beach along the west coast of the NC500. Achmelvich Beach on the right day is as beautiful as any beach. The sands are white and the sea is beautifully blue. We had a chilled hour walking along the seafront, and we toyed with the idea of going into the water. We dipped our feet in, but it was ice cold, so we decided to go against it. The beach was the last stop of the day and we headed for our campsite. And this is where we come to our most important tip. Pay attention to the road signs. The majority of the roads along the NC500 are easy to drive and nothing to worry about. Some are more narrow and have passing places every 30 metres or so. These will slow your journey down but are easy to drive. And then there's some roads that are extremely tight. These are pointed out by signs as you approach. We did go down 2 of these roads. The first was fine, we had no trouble. The second was a mistake. A 7-mile road took us 1 hour to navigate just because of how tight the road was. Our advice, in hindsight, would be to avoid these roads completely if you're not a confident driver, regardless of what vehicle you're driving. After a very stressful long drive, we finally arrived at our stop for the evening, Porter Bay Campsite. Of all the campsites we stayed at, this had the most beautiful views. The weather had completely changed and we were in for a great sunset. Next to the campsite is a stunning little pub that overlooks the bay. We had dinner here and a few drinks before calling it a night. To recap on our day, we left our campsite and headed for Smoo Cave. We then stopped for a hot chocolate. From here we quickly visited Sango Bay. From Sango Bay we drove 1 hour to Kylesku Bridge. After the bridge we then headed to the beach, and from the beach to our campsite. On to our final day along the Scotland NC500. We again set off early to our first stop of the day, Ardvreck Castle. The castle is an old ruin found along the NC500 route. It doesn't cost anything to stop off here and there's plenty of parking surrounding it. The castle is not the only attraction. The surrounding areas to the lochs are amazing to see. The good weather from the previous night had stuck around and we spent an hour or so just walking around the area and taking in the views and also taking some pictures. Our next stop was Ullapool. Ullapool is a pretty little fishing village located 40 minutes drive from the castle ruin. The town is full of little shops and restaurants to stop off at. This was by far the best town that we stopped off along the whole of the NC500 route.
Hey, so we've come to the chip shop and we have ordered haggis, so we're giving it a try. It looks actually really yummy. It looks a bit like a beef burger. Very nice. Quite happy with that.
We spent a good few hours walking around Ullapool before we set off again. The stretch of road between Ullapool and our campsite was the most beautiful either of us had ever drove. The weather was perfect and the views were unbelievable. Neither of us believed that the UK had such stunning scenery. The campsite was a 1 hour and 40 minute drive away, but we were stopping every 5 minutes to look out and take pictures. The west coast of Scotland alone is worth visiting. The last campsite we stayed at was Gairloch Caravan and Camping Site. This site was also a great stop off. On site was a shop, restaurant and bar. Also located right next to the site was another beautiful stretch of white sand beach. On our final day we followed the rest of the NC500 route back down into Inverness to complete our week on the NC500. That finishes off our 4-week itinerary along the NC500. Hopefully this gives you a few ideas and places to stop off at if you decide to take the trip yourself. Any questions, please leave a comment and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Also, if you want to stick around, feel free to like and subscribe to our channel. We have big plans for the rest of this year. Thanks for watching, take care.